Between hospital hallways and quiet victories, Emily Carter never imagined her origins held a secret powerful enough to change her destiny. Here, every story is a reminder that self-worth and love are the real keys to living life with hope and fullness. And what if you become a billionaire? This channel is new. Subscribe now and walk with us on this fresh journey. You know Emily Carter at 40, a nurse in a Boston community hospital, quiet, steady in her work. The alarm rings early, she puts on her uniform and heads to her shift. Life seems to move in circles, shifts, bills, short texts on her phone, and a silence that weighs heavier at night. Since childhood, she felt a hole in her chest. She grew up without a father, and the question, who was he, went unanswered. She learned to care for others with excellence, but left little room for herself. In the hallway, she greets patients by name. Mr. Brooks, diabetic, insists on skipping his diet, she explains again, calmly. He laughs, promises to try. It's always like this, people in pain, people afraid, and Emily as their safe harbor. The routine drains energy, but also gives meaning. When an elderly patient improves and gets discharged, she writes it down in a simple notebook, victory of the day. It's her way of reminding herself that effort matters. By late morning, a worried mother arrives with her feverish son. Emily calms her, takes the child's temperature, gives instructions, calls the doctor at just the right moment. Half an hour later, the boy rests and smiles. The mother grips Emily's hand tightly and says, "Thank you, you saved my day." Emily smiles back, tucks the moment into her memory like a treasure. Moments like this keep her going when exhaustion hits hard. In the cafeteria, Sarah, her shift colleague, talks about a trip and wedding plans. Emily listens carefully, asks questions, encourages her. When the conversation turns back to her, she sums it up, everything's quiet here. Too quiet. She thinks about taking a course, switching departments, trying for a master's degree, but the idea always gets postponed. What's missing isn't desire, it's a push strong enough to move her heart out of standby mode. In the afternoon, a war veteran trembles in the observation room. Emily holds his gaze, guides his breathing, helps his body step down from the peak of anxiety. The man, now calm, pulls an old coin from his pocket and hands it to her as a lucky charm. She tries to refuse, he insists. Emily tucks the coin into her lab coat pocket, feeling the cold metal, and promises to return it on his next visit. A small gesture, beginning, middle, and end in just a few minutes, and a reminder, those who care also need something to hold on to. Sometimes, after her shift ends, she walks to the hospital chapel. She doesn't give herself internal speeches, she just sits and breathes. She remembers her mother, the incomplete family stories, her father's name she never clearly heard. Every now and then, she considers digging through old documents, rummaging through boxes her mother kept. There's always a reason to delay, the schedule, the tiredness, the feeling that certain doors, once opened, change everything. At home, the TV stays on more for company than interest. She heats up soup, replies to messages, organizes her next shift schedule. On the table, an envelope of bills, and beside it, a notebook with notes about patients who improved. Two stacks telling different stories, the practical life that demands payment, and the human life that gives meaning back. Emily closes the notebook and looks out the window. The city keeps its rhythm, her heart, another. On a recent Saturday, she tried going out with Daniel, an old acquaintance from her youth who reappeared months ago at a hospital party. Light conversation, laughter, shared memories. Back home, she realized the laughter filled space, but didn't touch the old emptiness. She preferred the silence. She saved his number, without building big expectations. She learned to protect the little peace she had built. Sometimes the night brings insomnia. Emily gets up, drinks water, returns to bed. She picks up her victories of the day notebook and rereads the sentence she wrote for herself weeks ago: care also applies to those who care. She repeats it softly, like a promise. She lies down, closes her eyes, and decides that on her next shift, she'll ask the administrator about the advanced emergency course. Small steps. One at a time. The next morning, she heads to the hospital with that same calm demeanor as always. Outside, everything looks the same. Inside, an old question still asks for answers, and a new desire is slowly gathering courage. Emily doesn't dramatize. She works, comforts, adds up quiet victories. And somewhere in her mind, she holds the certainty that one day she'll discover what's still missing. The phone rang in the middle of a Saturday afternoon. Emily thought it was a patient, maybe an emergency call, but the voice on the line was different, firm, polite, and heavy with formality. "Miss Carter? I need to speak with you about your father." For a few seconds, she stayed silent. Father. The word that so often echoed in her heart now appeared concretely, cutting through decades of uncertainty. The lawyer continued, Richard Hamilton, one of New York's most influential businessmen, had passed away. And more, he was the father who had left her behind, recognized in his will, making her heir to part of a billion-dollar empire. Emily's head spun. The name Hamilton always showed up in headlines, but it felt like it belonged to another universe, not hers. And suddenly, the impossible became real. There was money, stocks, corporations involved, but the inheritance that weighed heaviest wasn't measured in numbers, it was the revelation of an origin hidden for 40 years. Why had her mother never told her? Why had he never looked for her? Questions came in an avalanche, and no answers arrived. She decided to travel to New York. The city she once knew only through movies and news would now become the stage for an unexpected encounter with the last name she carried. At the airport, she was greeted by people who claimed to be family, warm hugs, promises of unity, rehearsed smiles. Aunt Margaret praised how much she resembled Richard, while Grandfather Charles spoke about carrying on the legacy. Emily tried to believe in that welcome, but something felt off. Behind the sparkle in their eyes, there were shadows that made her doubt. In the Hamilton mansion, old documents and portraits of Richard filled every corner. She walked through the halls, trying to imagine who this man had been, the man who, though absent, now changed everything. But it only took a closer look at Margaret's and Charles's gestures for her to feel the discomfort. Conversations would stop when she entered the room, silent glances were exchanged, and they rushed her into meetings with lawyers. Emily realized, behind the talk of welcome, there were secrets no one wanted to reveal. And those secrets were directly tied to the empire that had suddenly landed in her hands. Emily woke up in a world that didn't seem to belong to her. Luxury cars waited for her at the door, stylists offered her elegant clothes, and suddenly, invitations to sophisticated events appeared as if she'd always belonged to that circle. The contrast was brutal. Just days before, she'd been rushing from one shift to another, uniform wrinkled, badge hanging from her neck. Now, people who had ignored her in the past greeted her with forced enthusiasm, as if they'd always stood by her side. The changes drew in familiar faces from long ago. Former schoolmates, once distant, reappeared with affectionate messages and reunion invitations. Emily accepted some, but soon noticed the real interest behind the hugs. Everyone wanted to be close to the money. Even Daniel, a childhood friend who always made her smile, returned full of charm. He talked as if no time had passed, but his eyes gleamed too brightly whenever the conversation turned to credit cards, trips, and expensive restaurants. Emily felt the weight of being desired not for who she was, but for what she represented. Despite all the glamour, she refused to leave the hospital. She wore luxurious clothes when necessary, but returned to her simple uniform with the same dedication as always. There, among narrow hallways and anxious patients, she found something no fortune could offer: true humanity. It was the shy smile of an elderly patient being discharged, the grateful handshake from a mother after her child stabilized. At the hospital, Emily wasn't the Hamilton heiress. She was just the nurse who knew how to listen, care, and bring calm. But that choice didn't go unnoticed. Margaret quietly criticized her: "You need to focus on business, not sick people." Charles watched silently, evaluating her every move. Emily knew there was a test underway, even if no one said it out loud. Between dazzling parties and exhausting shifts, the real challenge was resisting the lure of a life built on appearances and deciding whether her core self would be corrupted by the power she now carried. The pressure grew. In meetings packed with lawyers and paperwork, Margaret placed contracts in front of Emily that would return the Hamilton empire to the family's old management. Charles, with his deep voice, insisted it was best to preserve the honor of the legacy. Emily felt the weight of the trap: either she signed and became a disposable piece, or she confronted the family core that had never truly accepted her. The dilemma seemed to crush every fiber of her courage. In her room at the mansion, staring at the scattered papers, Emily wondered if she was ready to give it all up. Wealth, status, influence, things that, until recently, had never been part of her life. The fear of returning to that old emptiness haunted her. At the same time, a voice inside kept repeating that peace can't be bought with numbers. The battle wasn't just against Margaret and Charles, it was against the temptation to lose herself in a world that didn't reflect her true essence. It was at that moment Lily, her teenage daughter, rushed in with tears in her eyes and little hope in her arms. The baby reached out her tiny hand, gripping her grandmother's finger as if to say, "Here's what really matters." Emily felt her heart open in a way no fortune could ever trigger. Time stopped. All the weight of decisions, every suspicious glance, each poisonous word from the Hamiltons dissolved in the face of that simple, powerful gesture. Emily then understood: true wealth isn't in vaults or inherited titles, but in the connections that give life meaning. She held her granddaughter firmly, looked at Lily, and realized her greatest legacy wouldn't be signing contracts or running corporations, it would be teaching that love, courage, and dignity are the greatest inheritances anyone can leave behind. The woman who began this story as a lonely nurse now discovered, in the embrace of the family she herself had built, that life can always begin again, even after 40. This channel was created to inspire with life stories, intense, courage-awakening, mind-renewing tales. If this content touched you, don't keep it to yourself, subscribe and share. And get ready for the next videos, because each one might light a new flame of hope and love inside you.